Boo-doo-doo-doo, boo-doo-doo-doo. I am singing for the sound test until it comes up. Waiting for it to load on my phone. Come on, sing it with me.
I don't scat.
I'm the scat man. All right. Well, it says we're live. I just want to find the link so I can hear it on the other end. There we go. I found the link. All right. Well, I hear my beautiful voice coming from somewhere. All right, that's working. Good. Okay. Someone besides me talk so I can know you're coming through.
Mark.
Mark is here.
Mark.
How are things going?
Matt. Good. I hear everyone. All right, that was one thing I was worried about. Okay, I think we're set. So, hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and today we will be watching the 1977 Hobbit cartoon by Rankin Bass. I will start out by introducing everybody, and when I introduce you, say hi and let us know if you've ever seen this movie before or how old were you when you first saw this movie. So, going left to right, my first guest is a Thundercats historian, host of the Thundercast. He is Lio Convoy Reviews. Say hi, Lio. My first guest is a Thundercats historian, host of the Thundercast. Lio, you here? Lio Convoy Reviews. Say hi, Lio. All right, that's all right. My next guest is Mark Pellegrini. He goes by Mark by Pellecreepy on Twitter. He's a comic book writer and an animation buff. Say hi, Mark.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
And how long ago, like, how young were you when you first saw The Hobbit?
Oh, geez, I must have been like 4. My mom took us over to a local mom and shop video rental place called Errol's, and they had a poster of it on the wall, and I wanted to watch it because the poster looked really cool. And so she rented The Hobbit, and then she taped it from VHS onto a Betamax cassette. And I must have watched that Betamax cassette like 100 times over the years because I just loved that movie. It's actually one of my favorite animated films, so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. My next guest is Matt Krotz. He is the creator of Kyrie. Is that still ongoing on Kickstarter, Matt?
It is. Yeah, we're officially, we reached our funding goals like a couple hours before the 60-day campaign was up. So now we're in demand, and we're just kind of working out contract stuff with the printer. And yeah, looking forward to getting that fulfilled and moving on to book 3.
And you were kind of the inspiration for this stream because you'd never seen the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings film. So, and do you think you've ever seen the Hobbit cartoon before?
I think I have vague impressions about weird, larger than even the movie version feet on strangely drawn hobbits who all and everyone looking kind of frog-like or lizard-like.
That's the one.
Yeah, I got them confused. I guess I thought there was just one version. There's the Bakshi version as well, which I got a clip of. Though I probably saw a bit of Rankin Bass as a kid, but yeah. So this will be mostly new to me, I'm sure.
Well, it'll hopefully be the start of a nice saga for us of watching obscure Tolkien media.
Oh boy, that sounds fun.
Man, yeah, there's 3 of these things we can watch, yeah.
And that weird Russian cartoon I didn't know existed until Mark
the Gene
brought it to
Deitch one. Yeah, God, that thing, like, there's a story behind why they even made that thing, but we can do it as a bonus feature.
Yeah, as a recovery or something. All right, my last guest is The Metal. He is the creator of X Dynamis Chaos. Say hi, The Metal. And how?
There.
Have you ever seen this movie before?
Oh yeah, I've probably seen this like, I don't know, 50 times. I don't even remember how old I was when I first watched it because we kind of always had it.
In the chat, we're actually going to watch this movie behind the scenes and comment on it as we go. So for the full rich experience, I would recommend that you grab out your VHS copy of it, set up your VCR, and watch along with us. Lyle, are you back?
I sure hope I am.
All right, he's Lyle Convoy Reviews. He is
Hi.
a Thundercats historian. Have you ever seen this movie? Have you ever seen this movie before, Lyle?
Gee, I wonder if I've ever seen anything by Rankin Bass before.
Excellent. So everybody's channel and Twitter is in the description below. They all make really interesting content. Is someone joining us? Carl's amateur hour has made
I was
it.
actually able to make it.
Carltoons.
Carl is
Hey, Carl.
Carl is the creator of Hullgrave and an all-around cool guy. Carl, how old were you when you first saw this movie?
I don't think I've seen it proper.
All right. Wow. Very cool.
Makes two of us. Good.
So while the chat hurriedly grabs their copy of the movie and gets ready to go, I thought I would play the Cartoon Network trailer to stall for time a bit, and hopefully this isn't enough to get us banned like when I did the Hidden Fortress. And feel free to laugh at this trailer as much as you like. Thanks to Mark for finding this for us.
Sunday, Mr. Spim's Cartoon Theater takes you to a mystical world where wizards cast spells and fantasy prevails. You're in for awesome adventure on an epic search for an ancient treasure. But beware, for danger lurks between you and your fortune. Ghoulish goblins and a fire-breathing dragon. To complete your journey, you must believe in the magical powers of the smallest of heroes, the Hobbit, a Mr. Spim's special movie feature. Sunday at 7:30 on the best place for toon movies, Cartoon Network.
So I'd actually never seen that trailer before.
Oh yeah, that was for Mr. Spim's Cartoon Theater. So we were talking about this before we went live, but Cartoon Network, when they first started, they were like lean and mean. They had nothing but whatever Ted Turner owned. They didn't have any new content.
Wow.
So everything was like a package show. Like they had like 1970s night where they just took like 70s Hanna-Barbera cartoons and put them on. They had even like they had the Moxie show. If anybody remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Bobcat Goldthwait is the weird mocap CGI dog introducing like Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It was just all they're constantly trying to find new ways to make like old content seem fresh and exciting. And so like Mr. Spim's Cartoon Theater on Sundays had those like stop motion like bumpers and everything, but that was basically just a curated showcase for whatever movies Ted Turner owned the rights to.
Wow.
And he owned the rights to the Rankin Bass movies like Flight of Dragons and Last Unicorn and The Hobbit.
That's how I saw it. That's how I saw Flight of Dragons was through Mr. Spim's Cartoon Theater.
And yeah, all their promos were lit. They're all just made everything seem really exciting. And it turned out that, The Hobbit and Flight of Dragons and stuff were exciting. They were good movies. But then sometimes it was, like Gay Paris by Chuck Jones or something really bad. But you just never knew until you watched it. So
I resent the implication that the Looney Tunes cartoon movies were bad. Those are the ones where they would stitch together the theatrical shorts, right?
That was a lot of them. So Gay Paris actually wasn't a Looney Tunes movie. It was Chuck Jones's original movie about two cats in France, and it wasn't very good. But
right.
the Looney Tunes movies, like the Looney Bugs Bunny movie or the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie, they were just package films. They just took a bunch of shorts and stitched them together. The only one I liked was Quackbusters because it's Quackbusters.
So Mark and Lio, you're kind of our Rankin Bass animation buffs here. Is there anything you'd like the audience to know before we start the movie that might be interesting for them to look for, like art-wise?
Well, it depends. Are you going to pay attention this time, Marm?
Absolutely. I'm going to memorize everything that Lio Convoy says.
Okay. There's some things I want you to know specifically about how Topcraft, because, Topcraft, before it split to become Ghibli and Pacific Animation Studio, they're who Rankin Bass was using. Through The Hobbit and Flight of Dragons, The Last Unicorn, all of that. And they do something very different that a lot of anime didn't do at the time, or even Western cartoons, is you'll see how they emote with their hands while moving their heads back and forth and side to side. They're very emotive in terms of their actual movement, as most Western cartoons primarily focus on eyes, or Japanese cartoons do so to a different extent. What they do is they do a lot more expressions with body movement, like an Italian would talk. Just not as erratic. They're very slow, and they put a lot of detail into the facial construction, into the hand construction. So you'll notice when you'll see it, because you'll see it first in Hobbit, and then you'll pick it up in other things too, and you'll ultimately find it in Thundercats and Silverhawks. So it's a really interesting thing that you see they kept consistent. And I'll tell more things as we get further on, because there's a few little winks and nods here to other things they worked on later, and some details I personally like and have always liked in Rankin Bass and, say, Topcraft / Pacific Animation that I'll point later in the stream.
Mark, do you have any?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love and it's not just that they move so much, but that even when they don't move, the drawings, the keyframes, when they hold a shot, they look so kinetic and energetic that you can still feel the motion even when they're basically on pause, which is one of the we talk about it on Thundercats all the time. But that's one of the great accomplishments of Topcraft animation. I guess that's why they went on to break up and form part of Ghibli. So.
Fantastic. I'll remind you of something you said I thought was interesting. You pointed out that fairy book Golden Age illustrator Arthur Rackham was a big visual inspiration. So I looked him up, and what's interesting about it is you can see it where Arthur Rackham would have like this very realistic, ornate style, and he would also have like this cartoony style for trolls and giants and such. And you could even see a little bit of it. And Rackham would draw like very naughty. Not naughty, but hands with like knots and gnarls in them, that kind of thing, like big knuckles and kind of like big warty faces and giant feet and giant noses. And even the things like the trees and the backgrounds, there's often like a very abstract, detailed, flowing feel to everything.
And that's what's really impressive. That's so Minoru Nishida was the artist who was the background artist for the movie, for The Hobbit. But he was inspired by Arthur Rackham's style. And when you look at Rackham's style and Nishida's adaptations of him, it's very lush and very detailed, but also very flat. I guess we can point it out when we start the movie, but it's very two-dimensional, and yet it's also very lush. It's something really unique, and outside of these Rankin Bass movies that had Nishida doing the background art, there isn't really anything I can think of that comes to mind that looks like that gets that same aesthetic across. It's very unique to these films.
Excellent.
Also, I'm going to go ahead and say this right now. It's very crucial. Even the wife and I have argued. I like the animated Rankin Bass Hobbit more than any of the Peter Jackson films.
How was that controversial at all? That's just actual truth. It's better.
I watched it last week. I watched it and the Rankin Bass Return of the King together last week. And when you watch the Ralph Bakshi United Artists Lord of the Rings, you can tell that Peter Jackson watched it too, because all of the pacing of Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers is based directly off of Ralph Bakshi's film. Like he was using it as a template, as a guide. And that's why when you watch Return of the King, Peter Jackson's version, the pacing in that movie is lousy compared to the first two films because he didn't have a template to go with. That's why that movie has like 6 endings, and you're just like, why won't it stop? Because he didn't have Bakshi's guidance to go with when he made that one, and it kind of falls apart in the third film.
So it's kind of odd that Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is 2 of the books trying to compress that into one movie, right?
Yeah, and he does a very serviceable job for a movie that's only about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and he manages to take Fellowship and Two Towers and cram them all in there. I also watched the Rankin Bass Return of the King, and if you watch the Bakshi Lord of the Rings and the Rankin Bass Return of the King together, ignoring the vast differences in aesthetic, tone, voice actors, and music, they almost form the complete story. There's just a little sliver of story missing between Bakshi's film and the Rankin Bass film. But it's better than nothing. So I recommend watching them together. It
was a lifesaver for me before the Jackson trilogy came out, because I remember watching those movies and thinking that's weird. I was kind of weirded out by the Bakshi one at first, and then I read the books and I got like the missing chunks and pieces of it, because I had like baby memories of the 2 Rankin Bass ones. Matt C. or Carl, you're kind of our newbies here. Do you have anything you want to share, maybe about like how Tolkien has inspired your work, or maybe how he's spoken to you as a writer?
Carl, you go first. Interested in your thoughts.
Carl, you with us?
I wouldn't say Tolkien has directly influenced me in any way.
Huh.
However, I would say that I have read up on him. I do think he's an interesting person, and his accounts of war and his personal beliefs are something I find fascinating. I really like looking into that. The way he incorporates his beliefs into his work is probably the most interesting part, because he was a man who fully rejected the idea of using like direct metaphors or allegories in his own work. He didn't want to do that at all, and I find that interesting.
Well, it's
See,
amazing
yeah.
you say that, considering, how everybody's going crazy about orcs right now.
Right.
They're saying that orcs are an allegory for, this or that. It's racist, it's, whatever. And it's kind of just what people are projecting onto them because, like, as you said, Tolkien himself didn't want to use allegories. It's just what people bring to the table when they watch the movie.
I don't
Or
know if I
read
just
the
heard
book.
this from a secondhand source, but I heard that Tolkien was kind of not inspired, but he saw anti-Semitic tropes of dwarves in like Wagner operas, and so he had the idea of like, well, what would be a non-anti-Semitic portrayal of Jews using the dwarf archetype, right? So I don't know if that is actually like a direct thing that inspired Tolkien, but it'd actually be interesting that maybe he would use those archetypes, but almost kind of redeem them. Take a racist archetype, but then turn it into something wholesome or uplifting. Because the dwarves are a very fascinating race. They're my favorite race throughout all of the books.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
I
if
mean-
anything, he's kind of he portrays the humans in the worst light of all the races.
Yeah, they're
But,
jerks. The humans are all jerks.
Yeah, I think you're meant to be somewhat ashamed of the race of men, for the most part.
We're so
know?
easily
It's like reality.
corrupted, we're the ones who turn into the Nazgul. We can't seem to do anything right. We can't be trusted. We're awful.
Yeah. And our best example, I mean, Aragorn being the rightful king, he's a good king because he understands. He spends much of his life trying to escape it. his duty, because he understands that he's not worthy of it, I guess, which is what allows him to be a good king, I guess, which I think is pretty interesting. That's not something that's explored in the other races,
I think all of the races are portrayed as being equally dirty, and it might be your human guilt that's projecting that onto.
Yes, it could be. I could be projecting.
I mean, my least favorite race is the elves, just because they always present themselves and they're always regarded as like their perfection, like they're supposed to be the master race of Middle Earth. But if you read the way he writes their dialogue, they're jerks. They're really rude. They're really condescending to everyone. They laugh at like the hobbits when they first see them, walking down the path from the Shire. They mock the dwarves when they come to Rivendell in the book version of the Hobbit. Like they're just really unlikable. But they're always presented and regarded as this beautiful, flawless people. I sort of like that, that juxtaposition in the books.
I like the elven race. I feel like Tolkien might have, like, there's a sense where a lot of what Tolkien wrote was from the perspective of the elves because they're like the great historians, where it hints at some of like elven injustices toward dwarves, right? It's really interesting because it's basically like he's writing he's imagining himself as a historian as he writes this book, and even something like the Silmarillion clearly has like a pro-elf bias, but Tolkien as a writer might be aware of that, and that's maybe you're supposed to notice that as a reader that it has a pro-elf bias. All right, I think we've given everyone enough time to cue it up. Does everybody?
So what you're saying is that the Lord of the Rings is pro-elf propaganda?
You're damn right it is.
And Tolkien
Well,
was
Marm,
a self-loathing
before we start
human.
the movie, are we going to do a just an in memoriam for Sean Bean?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Orson Bean.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Sean Bean.
Orson Bean.
Okay.
Though
Oh,
you
don't
can
do
have
that
an
to us.
memoriam for Sean Bean guys in like every movie.
So, thank you, Mark, for reminding me of this. But Orson Bean is the voice actor who portrayed Bilbo Baggins in this movie, and he actually passed away February of this year. So, I've never met him personally, but he played a big part in my childhood. So, I'd just like to take a moment for all of us to thank him, send condolences to his family, and we will be dedicating this stream in his memory.
Thanks, Orson.
Thank you, sir. All right, so
thank
just in case it's not obvious, once we hit play, you cannot pause, or else we will all get unsynced. And the same goes for the audience. So if you got to go to the bathroom, let it play while you go to the bathroom, and then come back and talk more.
I do want to say one thing.
Yes.
And I have problems with Hangouts on this computer sometimes, so if like an hour in you don't hear from me, just give me a nudge and I'll leave the call and jump back in.
All right, I will keep an ear out for that.
Good thing this movie's about an hour long anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So is everybody ready?
I
All right, let's do this in 3, 2, 1, okay?
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Way to take charge, Lio.
That's what
the
he
music.
does.
Even the smoke is gnarly.
So John Huston is the voice of Gandalf, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Disney film The Black Cauldron. They got John Huston to do the opening narration, and I swear they did because they wanted to trick people thinking it was narrated by Gandalf. Those niche backgrounds.
Wow.
It's a very soft watercolor effect.
That lets do most of the work, I guess.
Honestly,
Yeah, the DVD version I have is all X on it. Like I don't know, there's something.
it's almost like Warner Brothers has a bad habit of Rankin boss stuff with that.
Yeah.
I think we might be watching the DVD version. Yeah.
Just sort of teleports in there.
This is how I plan on appearing at people's doorsteps.
The lightning effect. That-
That is exactly how Lyle Kyle introduced himself to me. I'm on board.
I kind of miss the whole comedic setup of the dwarves coming two at a time and flustering Bilbo more and more.
Yeah, just abandon that mood, I guess.
I mean,
Also,
they had to condense.
Yeah.
And point of issue here, one of my bigger issue with the Peter Jackson Hobbit is all the dwarves were like, I prefer them up.
The crushed one.
Yeah.
Be kind of nasty. Oh, that's Hans Conrad's
They might be-
Thorin.
Yeah.
He was a cook.
I like that Bomber's noticeably fatter than everyone, and Feely and Keely are noticeably younger than everyone. Because they're
Yeah,
Thorin's
the
they're
time's
Thorin's nephews in the book, and they're basically like the last of his line.
And I've heard people complain about songs in this movie, but all the lyrics and all the songs are taken straight out of the books. I'm told.
And I love it.
I love them.
Actually, why I did not hate the first Hobbit that Peter Jackson did, at least because it had songs in it.
Yeah.
I feel like the Jackson movies, they gradually got more and more off the rails. I haven't seen the third one yet. I didn't want to subject
There's so
myself
much
to it.
padding in them.
Oh, I hated the second.
That-
Yeah, Desolation of Smaug. It has that whole like 30-minute sequence at the end where they're fighting Smaug in the treasure room, and it's just pointless. And that.
I have to say, I do like the aesthetic of building these characters just out of hands.
Knows it.
Yeah, and noses.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm pointing about the head and the hand movements.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also
Yep.
things like the shadows on the wall, like that's a creative framing device. It actually saves you some animation work, but it's also like it's not the normal depiction of the thing from just like a flat-on angle. That's a great transition.
Man, we need more comics that look like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, I'll disagree. I think this works better in in motion than it does stagnant.
I mean, I would love more movies that look like this because they just don't make them like this anymore.
Oh yeah, sure. More everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just with
You might
the
need to do a
watercolor
comic like this
background.
to convince somebody to do a movie like it.
Okay,
Yeah, you need a proof of concept.
if you paid attention to the smelting thing, they actually reframed part of that to build Sky Tomb in the second season of Thundercats.
Huh.
Oh, cool.
I mean, if you've done the work to design
cool.
it, find a way to use it. Lyle might know more about this, but I know that there are also certain poses and such that they would pull from, and then if they wanted someone to like gesture in Thundercats, they tell them to go find the pose from The Hobbit, and you can kind of see like a pointing pose or something like that.
Yeah, if I remember, when we get to Riddles in the Dark, they do the same thing with Gollum's bottom lip that they do with Slythe and Thundercats, where they have the upper lip like an overbite. So the bottom lip is just kind of this like U shape that's protruding out, and it's the only part that's animated for the lip sync. It saves a lot of time and money to do it that way. I love that shot of that fir tree. I don't know why.
The background art in this movie is something else.
And the fire you just saw, they repurposed later in the movie for Smaug.
It's funny. I wonder if later generations are going to look back on the 1970s as like almost kind of a renaissance of dirty hippies kind of rediscovering like old classic illustration techniques and kind of putting it on big screen like this, or kind of.
I mean, yeah, Ralph Bakshi was the dirtiest hippie of them all, and he did his Lord of the Rings movie.
yeah, and it was just kind of it's like a decade of really interesting stuff like this, and then never before or since.
And one right after the other. Like, wasn't Bakshi exactly like 1 year after The Hobbit aired on television that his thing came out?
Yeah. Yeah, so basically the Rankin Bass Hobbit, the United Arts, Lord of the Rings, and the Rankin Bass Return of the King all came out in rapid succession between 77 and 79. So, I mean, if you were there at the time, you were basically doing one installment in the series after another each year, just by different people.
I love how that's considered a lucky number to them.
14.
14th, yeah.
Of course he does.
All those hand gestures. It's great.
Someone once made fun of Ralph Bakshi for liking. It's called milking the giant cow. It's when an actor brings up both of their fists and brings them down in frustration. So it looks and I think Rankin Bass is just a little bit more subtle. Like nice hand out there as a welcoming gesture, hand to the chest as a kind of like relaxed gesture, that kind of thing.
Also, I love this song.
Oh, Glenn Yarborough's songs. I
do
like
too.
this song too. I mean, I guess it's kind of spoiled now because South Park made fun of it in the Lemmy Winks episode. I'm sure there's a
They made
generation
fun of
whenever they hear this.
Yo Ho My Lad, that one too.
They did, yeah. Go Lemmy Winks, stop WikiLeaks.
They love this. They have an Imagination Land episode, and the orcs look like Rankin Bass orcs. Like they clearly are heavily inspired by this.
I mean, I love this Glenn Yarborough song, but it sounds like something a serial killer would sing to himself while dancing in the dark. It's just something.
Yeah.
The
Well,
great.
it says my what's it called? My alarm for waking up, because it's like the perfect song to waking up in your day.
Right? Seize the day. That's basically what the song's all about. It's like right here, yeah. He's just telling you to get off your ass and
Yeah.
do something, Bilbo.
Which it's interesting that this is the only it's iconic even though it's not written by Tolkien. It's emphasizing one of the themes from The Hobbit, which is that Bilbo, as a middle-aged man, still needs to have an adventure, right? And then the song is basically making the argument that Bilbo's adventure is like the adventure of life, and stay-at-homeism is kind of like, I don't know, corrupting to you. You have to get out, you have to go explore, you have to go find stuff.
Well, what's amazing about The Hobbit is that it's inspiring when you're a little kid because you see all these dragons and monsters and stuff and you want to go on an adventure, but it's still inspiring when you're an old man because it's saying that even when you're in your 60s, you can still go on an adventure. So basically, the inspirational
It's kind of
feeling
like
lasts your whole
the
life.
Abrahamic story in that way, because Abraham was an old man when he left.
There's another nice tree. Look at that. Look at all those branches.
Ooh, yeah.
I guess he's also able to invent a race of creatures that aren't actually in the English, mythological.
Yeah, isn't the word Hobbit trademarked? Like, that's not a public domain
Yeah,
thing?
the story is he was grading a paper that was extremely boring, and so just in boredom, he wrote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," on the paper, and I don't think he initially conceived of the Hobbit as being part of his insane Middle Earth mythos that he was coming up with in the trenches of World War I. He kind of like gradually found a way to connect it all together. And there are some scenes in the original edition of The Hobbit that would actually contradict things in Lord of the Rings, so he wrote an updated edition. But one of the things I respect about him as an author is he didn't just like say, "Oh, I'm just going to change it," and that's that, kind of like the J.K. Rowling method. He found kind of explanations for his mistakes. So Bilbo's initial story of how he got the ring in the first edition, later he decided, well, that was a lie that Bilbo came up with to make himself seem more favorable, and the real story is what's told in kind of like all the subsequent editions.
Oh, wow.
The design of the trolls, I like that they're eating their anime meat, the bone that has a chunk of meat on
I
it.
like how their nose and their top lip are just one thing.
Yeah.
It's a really good design.
Well, they look like trolls, like from Swedish fairy tale books that you sometimes see.
Quick, they said nothing but mutton to eat. And look at the size of those legs. How big are the sheep in it?
God, I hated this scene with Peter
totally
Jackson version. When he's like, they're blowing snot all over him, and they're like the Three Stooges. Like, I hated that part.
It's stuff like this that makes me think of cross-pollination must have been going on that people might not even been aware of in the 70s with like the Dark Crystal and other kind of similar character designs where people just wanted things with weird big beaks and like just that kind of aesthetic,
Yeah, there's an aesthetic zeitgeist, in like the 2000s, every giant monster, in the 2010s as well, looked like the cave troll from Fellowship of the Rings, like Doomsday from Batman v Superman and Abomination from Incredible Hulk. They all look the same. It's that zeitgeist.
Speaking of visual cues here, if you look at any non-human character that Rankin Boss / Topcraft did, you can just easily tell, not just by faces sometimes, even by hands. You take a look at the hands of the trolls, they're the same hands they use on the mutants, the Thundercats, and other characters.
Well, it's always amazing just how detailed all the character models are, and yet they animate them so fluidly. Look at his face. There's so many lines, and yet they still animate it frame by frame. It goes against the wisdom of today, where every cartoon has to be hyper stylized and simplified to make the animation easier. But look at this. It's so detailed, yet it looks so good in movement.
I guess it's kind of the anime approach of was it on fours or something where you can spend more time frames because they're drawing less frames.
Yeah, as long as the individual drawings look good, and they look kinetic, you don't notice necessarily when they're moving.
Like our brains process at 22 frames per second. I don't need 60 frame per second animation. No.
Also, something here real important I want to point out. I love other studios. I love how they draw swords from Topcraft to Pacific Animation. Just love it. The white blades just really make them stand out and make them look real.
Look at all the detail on the hilt of that sword. I mean, it's got a name, Well,
it's that's because the sword that Gandalf is holding is actually based on a real sword. Like, the design that he's holding right now is from Toledo, Spain.
Oh, cool. Yeah, they're clearly referencing something.
Yeah, I was about to say, they looked very realistic.
I love going to like armory shows at like museums, because you can find really weird, unique designs from history, and then you can just like completely rip that off for a really weird, unique anime design and have excellent detail in it.
There's that serial killer again.
No, even with Bilbo's sword Sting, the reason it has that weird curl on the front near the finger is because it's actually a finger guard it's a parrying dagger. So it's a nice little detail.
Yeah, I love that detail. It's almost like when I was a kid, I thought it was like the trigger because I didn't know, the parrying guard or any of that. But I just love that little detail. It gave it some character without overdoing it.
I'm really
Shut
gonna
up,
start
Thorin.
trying out that open hand gesture every time I'm talking to somebody.
I love that Gandalf like ninja appears and every time he shows back up.
I'd hate to say this, but I wonder if the people who did the CDI Zelda cutscenes took inspiration from these Rankin Bass Lord of the Rings
It
movies.
looks like it.
Right?
I
The
think that was a
Crayola
Russian-
version
I
of
think it was
it.
like a
Zelda
Russian
CDI
animation.
cutscenes kind of look like a bastardized version of this.
They're a
Like
beautiful
they just
mess. I mean,
highly
those things.
compressed every image.
Of course, this looks much better.
Well, you don't have like Bilbo going like, "I'm so hungry, I could eat an Octorok."
I remember when those got featured in Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power had an article on the CDI Zelda games before they were even put on YouTube. It was such like an obscure little thing before it became a YouTube poop sensation.
Or Hotel Mario. Sure was nice of the princess to invite us to a picnic, eh, Luigi?
You know what they say? All toasters toast toast. We are so off topic. I'm sorry, Rankin Bass.
The
Okay,
worst
that's okay.
possible
Wait. What's
segue.
it called? What's it called when the foreground is going one way and they're imitating
Oh,
parallax?
parallaxing?
Yeah.
Or a multiplane effect is when they have it on different layers.
And
Yeah, like
before computers, you'd have to like move each cell separately,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Yeah, iWorks invented the multiplane camera, which is they broke the background paintings up into layers and then put them on different layers of glass and shot them vertically.
And it became
Really complicated.
Pinocchio has a opening shot with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it looks so simple, but
First done
back then doing everything analog,
Yeah, now you can just use like a transparent layer and just have keyframes drag it across.
right? You just do everything in Toon Boom, it
So
does all the
much
work for you.
yeah, because they'd take a photo with their camera and then they'd have to rearrange every layer, right,
Yeah.
Yep.
to mathematically fit each relative speed they were trying to go with, and then take another snap, and then
It was a very intensive process.
So
I love the way they drew Elrond here. Is they broke the rule. They gave him a beard. Elves aren't supposed to look cool. Also, he's got a crown that's like a constellation for some reason.
right.
That's cool.
Stars and light.
Dracula collar. It ties into what you were saying earlier about kind of like a lawless approach to Tolkien, where your studio can have like completely its own interpretation of it.
Yeah, we were talking about that before we went live. So ever since the Peter Jackson movies, there's kind of like this house style on Lord of the Rings where everything looks like the movies now, but in the 80s, like, wanted always unique. Kind of neat, like the Hildebrandt era of Lord of the Rings, stuff like that.
Also of note here, they just passed a scene where he tells them what the swords' names are and what it means. Because of people assume swords only have names, but back in like the medieval ages, even of course in ancient Japan, you would often name your sword. It didn't have to have an ability, obviously, because of the reality here. And I just think that's neat, like the foe hammer. Like that's
the most badass name.
yeah.
And Orc
Goblin Cleaver.
This becomes your companion. Like people name their cars and stuff.
Well, I like that the swords have their own histories. Like when Gandalf attacks the Great Goblin later in the movie, the Great Goblin recognizes the sword. Like the sword's a person, like it knows it.
And Bilbo's sword does not have a name yet. He finds a name for it throughout his journey, and it's a humble name. It's not as epic or grand as Foehammer, but it's sort of like he comes up with something that is his own as part of his journey of becoming a man.
He just fought trolls and he's having nightmares about dishes. What's wrong with this guy?
My life.
Well, that's the Hobbit life, you know. They don't like being disturbed.
Took that really well. And I love the goblin or orc designs in these movies. The double throats that they have.
Yeah.
They'll start yelling. Like, that's such a great detail. It's so monstrous and inhuman. Go lend me wings. Stop
Even though they're horrendous, they almost have a cute quality because of the bullfrog inspiration. I think they're cuter in Return of the King because they were going for the vibe of maybe the orcs in Return of the King are just.
Where's a scene?
Oh, this is like toddler trauma here.
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is the only thing that ever got the scale of goblins and orcs right. They're supposed to be smaller than a human. They're supposed to be around dwarf and hobbit size, and that's why the Uruk-hai in Lord of the Rings were special, is because they were orcs that were the size of a man, and that was a big deal. Just lore. I'm sorry.
But they're still of an intimidating size if you're a hobbit. Yeah.
Yeah, they're still like monstrous, and there's a lot of them.
And I love the fact that you can tell where Rankin Boss got Slive proportions from with these characters.
Yeah.
Oh, that's John Stevenson, the Great Goblin. He was Mr. Slade on. That's Don Messick. He was on Transformers and Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, I love how much time they spend on the inside of their mouths, this like double throat thing they got going on.
Yeah, this part, he's gonna chomp his head off. I love that.
Which is kind of, in the book it says he ran towards Thorin with his mouth open, and that's kind of like a neat example of where you could interpret it that way, but Tolkien isn't necessarily directly saying he's going to bite his head off. I love when a book leaves something a little open. Yeah.
Black jaw.
This is weird. When they get, he just disappears. He just kind of like, woo.
They had to find some way to boulderize character death.
Yeah, they do it with a spider disappear.
It's a very stylized way of dealing with the topic of violence.
Yeah, we really don't know what censorship they were under at that point either. It was the 70s.
Oh, in the 70s? Yeah, I'm surprised they even were allowed to have fire in this movie. You know. It just makes me laugh every time I see it.
Just that upside down spin.
Woo! It just goes off into the void.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Yeah, commercial break.
Now, pay attention to the scene in case you're ever in downtown Houston, downtown LA, or Chicago. It's important dealing with the homeless.
Oh, I have the experience.
I like. So the actor's name is Brother Theodore, and I like him than Andy Serkis.
Oh, this is my favorite Gollum.
His first name is Brother?
Yeah, that was his actor name was. It's just Theodore, but sometimes he's credited as Brother Theodore.
I like how all of the monsters have prominent upper or lower lips.
Oh yeah, so I was talking about. You'll see how they do the lip sync on him, where sometimes his beak will overhang, so all they have to do is the bottom lip, and it saves them a lot of time on animation, but it still looks really good.
Yeah, Gollum looks like he heavily inspired Don Bluth's Dynasty.
He kind of does. He's got the head shape.
Yeah, he's so creepy.
And then the way, just like the lip, everything.
Yeah. Jeez. You were sharing some of the production art. So he was designed by Walt Simonson. Is that correct?
Walt Simonson did an illustration for it. I think he did. I think Walt Simonson did illustrations for the book they published, where they got a bunch of artists to do illustrations. This one would actually be more influenced by Lester Abrams. So Lester Abrams did illustrations for Children's Digest, and if you look at his illustrations, you can just totally see how it's his own zany interpretation of Gollum and the Hobbit. And Rankin saw the Children's Digest and tapped him to do like the initial like design work in America before they sent it over to Japan. And it's sort of like Gollum has the same kind of frog-like structure in his illustration. Bilbo kind of has that squarish structure to him. And then I think the Japanese character designers refined it. But I think Lester Abrams would definitely be kind of like the origin story of frog-like Gollum.
Well, it's the best goblin. Or the best Gollum, sorry.
Also kind of be like his ears get all big and his feet are also hands.
I like the fact
And that's
that
what's
his
so
eyes
cool is
are
that you
huge,
can't really-
But most of his eye is covered by the eyelid at most points.
I think that's what makes him so creepy in this, is that you can't pin him down to like one animal or one species. He's part frog, part monkey, part human. He's got the long scraggly hair and the claws. Like he's just kind of all over the place. He's very unnerving.
As opposed to the Peterson version, which just kind of looks like a weird little man.
The crack addict, yeah.
A tortured
Well, to be
hobbit.
fair, that's kind of what Gollum
That's
is
what he's
when it
supposed
comes
to be,
down
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right, and the orcs are supposed to be kind of a tortured and ruined form of elf life, I think, right? So, or man and elf breeding or something weird. Because they have some creative freedom in how to interpret the characters, they're not as worried as much about what the literal origin story they're supposed to be is.
Well, I love that old school claw design where it just like comes straight out of the fingers as if it's one thing.
Yeah, just like same color.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You see that in most of their non-human designs when it comes to hands.
It's like a vulture claw or something.
So in the backgrounds of the cave, a lot of the caves, you can see faces in the walls, which is so creepy.
Ooh.
And there's that skeleton there too. But a lot of those cave like divots and rocks form faces. It's just eerie.
Also, a little bit of character here. I really like how polite they make Bilbo in this. Mind you, I'm armed with an elvish blade.
Yeah.
Good old Orson Bean, he really sells that.
I like how raspy Gollum's voice is in this.
Yeah, Theodore voices a character in The Last Unicorn, which is also by Rankin Bass, and he uses the exact same voice for the character.
Yes, he does. Yeah. It sounded familiar. For some reason, I know that movie better than this one.
With music by America.
The funny thing is that the character he voices in Last Unicorn is bad at riddles. I guess that's why they cast him as a joke.
Yeah.
From the book, there's a really nice theme that all of Bilbo's riddles have to do with folksy, homely things like cooking eggs, and all of Gollum's riddles have to do with things like blind fish and death and time, grinding the mountains down. Like, there's a really neat good and evil theme to the riddle game they play.
But then Bilbo
really
just pulls some bullshit and says, "What's in my pocket?" Like, that's not a riddle, Bilbo.
Though Gollum accepted it.
Well,
and-
Gollum hasn't seen
Yeah,
people
Gollum
in so
accepted
long. How he's supposed to know?
Those eyes.
Randomly guesses the answer out of panic. I need more time.
I feel like Gollum set himself up for that one, though.
I knew that all along. That's an old one. Bilbo's full of it, man.
So is this voice actor like kind of a persona in and of himself to go around calling himself Brother Theodore? Like,
Yeah, he was. I don't think he was in too many movies. I think he was mostly like a stage actor, and they're kind of a breed in and of himself. They're all very eccentric.
If you want to get famous, go to Hollywood. If you want to get good, go to the stage.
yeah. I'm assuming they had teams that would work on particular characters to animate for this film, like most animated movies.
So I know,
and yet
go ahead.
they're able to pull off like a consistent feel. Like, Gollum doesn't feel out of place, even though he feels very unique within the story.
Yeah, it's even the best studios have a hard time with that. Like if you go back and you watch Beauty and the Beast, the Disney one, you can tell when it's a different person drawing Belle in different scenes because they have like her head shape will change, or sometimes there's one artist in that movie who decided that Belle just needed to have like bedroom eyes all the time. So yeah.
Or just even within that movie, like the the Candelabra team is going to draw a very different style, honestly, than even some of the other animated household items, which is kind of the appeal, I guess, of Disney. But this Rankin Bass, I guess the appeal is that everything actually fits within a very distinct aesthetic.
Oh, yeah, it's very consistent.
And Sugiyuki Kubo
like a
would
cohesive
be
image.
That looked really good and it's convincing.
Lyo's muted himself, but he might know more about this. Sugiyuki Kubo would have been the supervising animator and character designer. So I imagine there would be like what would it be like? Younger animators who are animating individual characters, and Kubo is sort of the one who is making sure everything has that similar fit to it. When you search Kubo, what comes up first is his design work for Thundercats. So Lyle could probably tell us all about that. Yeah.
But yeah, he did a lot of really the heavy lifting for Thundercats and other productions under Rankin Bass.
Was he the one you were telling me, Lyo? Is like he works on Naruto now?
Yes, as the animation director.
Oh wow.
Man.
Wow.
He's still in the business. That's pretty amazing when you think about how old this movie is.
Work on it now, but Naruto was in the early 2000s. Same with Bleach, and he worked on that one too for the same job.
That's right. Naruto is old, and so am I.
Yeah, this movie's like 45 years old now, or something. Right? It's amazing.
Well, that's the question. Does he still work on the team? Like, is he in Boruto?
I don't know. I doubt it. I think hopefully by now he's retired.
Yeah, give the guy a break.
Nobody retires in Japan. People work themselves to death over there.
You hope they're doing it voluntarily. You hope the pay is good enough that they're just so badass. I'm 80. What am I gonna do? Sit around in a nursing home? I want to animate.
Man, even Miyazaki doesn't want to animate anymore. You ever see an interview with him? He's just miserable all the time.
Anime was a mistake.
And constantly talking about he's gonna retire.
And then coming right back out.
Yeah.
So earlier I was mentioning the changes in Tolkien's work. In the first edition, Gollum says, well, you won the riddle game, so I'll go get you my magic ring. It was my birthday present, right? He just gives it to Bilbo. And that, of course, doesn't work if...
It's not very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would have been the lie that Bilbo told.
Yep.
Wow.
Real quick, Sugiyuki Kubo also worked on Darkwing Duck, oddly enough.
Oh, that's right, because he was with Topcraft. After it dissolved after Castle in the Sky, some of the people went and formed Ghibli, and some of the people formed Animation to work with Rankin Bass. Then Walt Disney bought Pacific Animation and turned them into Disney Animation. So that's why Sugiyuki Kubo would have worked on Darkwing Duck.
Wow.
Because he was with Walt Disney Animation at the time. He was inherited. That's like Disney bought Sugiyuki Kubo from Rankin Bass.
I don't remember his name, but I met one of the American staff for Darkwing Duck, and he worked for DC Comics before going into Darkwing Duck, and So the little story he told me was his thought was, well, I drew Batman, I can draw Darkwing Duck, and then he would have one of his supervisors redline his designs of Darkwing Duck's bill and just write "wrong" in big red letters on it.
Broke him.
Well,
This is hard.
There's a reason for that. If you actually look at Darkwing's bill compared to the other Disney ducks, it is actually fundamentally different in shape and size.
Because he's a different kind of duck.
It is
isn't
bigger, isn't it?
Yes, it's an odd joke that he's got a big mouth.
Oh, cool.
Look at that wolf. It's a great drawing.
Not a giant troll monster like in the Jacksonville.
Yeah, the wargs are like these weird mutant dog things. I don't know. I like them better when they're just wolves. I don't know. It's a bit more fairy tale than high fantasy, but I love.
Inside you, there are
Like me
two
and Jim.
wolves. One is gay, the other is gay. You are gay. I love how sadistic the goblin songs are.
Hand grenades.
Oh yeah. I think he did that in the book. Yeah, he used
He
fire.
does do that in the book. It's just funny.
Them riding over the hill with weapons in hand on the wolves' backs. It's a really cool visual.
Which is another indication that they have to be slightly smaller for that to work, unless the
Yeah.
wargs are giant wolves.
And that's what, and so in the Peter Jackson Return of the King, that's why that scene really didn't work in the live action movie where Frodo and Sam disguise themselves as orcs, because they don't look like orcs because they're so small. But in the book it worked because orcs are supposed to be small. Yeah.
And the Uruk-hai are basically dead at that point. Saruman's army got wiped out.
It's kind of interesting how, for some reason, Peter Jackson got the idea, ooh, make the goblins big. Make the orcs big.
They were kind of smaller in Fellowship. I feel like he wanted to make them bigger when he got into Return of the King. Jackson actually told a story about that. So in Fellowship, they're more creepy and spider-like. And he didn't like that because he thought they looked like they were walking around in a diaper. So he decided for Return of the King, he'd just make them like big, strong goblins again or something. Like that's just an example of this doesn't make sense, but it doesn't look cool, so I'm going to make it look cool for my movie, I think.
Oh, why didn't the Eagles just fly the ring into Mordor?
I hate that argument so much.
It's so dumb.
Let's go ask a sentient race that
What do you think
are kind
about
of
it too?
I mean, the whole point was that they had to get the ring into
Effectively divine
Mordor.
intervention.
Essentially, yeah. Oh dang, that's a cool design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the
No,
chest
Gandalf
feather?
doing anything is divine intervention.
Yeah.
If Noldor apologist could make it, he'd be telling us about how much he hates the Valar, and the Eagles are basically the stooges of, I think Manwë or something. Silmarillion lore.
So I've read the Hobbit like 3 or 4 times. It's one of my favorite books, but I've only read through Lord of the Rings once, and I don't think I ever want to read it again. It's like reading the Bible. It's like, oh, Thorin, who begat such and such, who begat such and such, who begat who and who, and I'm like, oh my god.
I finally got through it a second time. Like, I forced myself to do it when I was like 14 to watch the movies, and every time since then I failed, and I think I was like drawing or something, and I put on the audiobook edition. The Rob English reads the audiobook very well, so I feel like if you can marathon it and not quit, I mean, Tolkien is like a language professor, right? He loves using his flowing prose, but I think he at least made Lord of the Rings is a much more down-to-earth book than I remembered from high school. He's at least still making an effort to write for maybe a teenage audience.
Yeah, I mean, so The Hobbit gets categorized as a children's book, and it is. It's not a childish children's book, though.
Exactly.
You know, it's not like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. You know, it's more like Treasure Island or Huck Finn, where it's a book that has content that's appropriate for children, but not condescending. It's not simply written. It's something that an adult can read and enjoy as well.
I,
That's the best kind.
You
of
mean the way a children's story should be written?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly.
I've always described the narration style of The Hobbit is it's almost exactly as if Tolkien is reading this, as a bedtime story to Christopher Tolkien because he wrote it as a Christmas treat for Christmas Tolkien. So there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of like conversational questions in The Hobbit. Like, I suppose you think this is an awfully silly riddle for Bilbo to have come up with, but you must understand that he came up with it in a very. I don't think you could do much better if you were in the dark and scared. That kind of.
Yeah, it does address the reader a lot. Yeah.
And that helps what that does is that helps a child think critically about what is going on, because you could just like totally have it fly over your head, like what the subtext is for like Riddles in the Dark or something. But if you just ask a child a question, they instantly start thinking about it and can usually come up with the answers on their own. So.
Why did people dislike the songs in this movie?
I don't get it either. So the Rankin Bass fantasy films and Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, they feel classy in a way that we don't make movies anymore. They treat the material with kind of a dignity that if this were made today, it would be filled with like pop songs and bad jokes and even the Peter Jackson movies had their moments where Aragorn says, "Let us hunt some orc." Or that one part where the orcs are like, "Meat's back on the menu, boys." The really bad dialogue that feels so, anachronistic with the rest of the movie. You can just tell that Jackson put it in there because I thought it would sound cool. They don't do that in these movies. They treat everything very respectfully with a lot of dignity.
Or how
look at this scene. This is beautiful.
Yeah, or how in the third Hobbit movie that one dwarf guy was just screaming, "Come at me, you bastards!"
Yeah, I know, right? It takes you
it's
right
just
out
kind
of
of
it.
awkward.
Yeah, they don't do that. They treat everything really well, and we don't have the capacity to do that with our media anymore. So that's why it's one of those don't make them like the.
Or we have the capacity, but like institutional Hollywood.
Nobody
isn't
wants
as-
to.
Yeah.
It's almost got like this old-fashioned epic feeling. A bard is telling you this story around a campfire or the hearth, and you're just kind of like, every so often he'll strum into a song and then go back to the story.
Yeah. And they literally used the medieval bar as a framing device for the Return of the King, because they had absolutely no way. How the heck are we going to set up Return of the King when we haven't done anything from the first two books, right? So
that looks so cool.
Yeah, that's right. They actually
His
got
eyebrows
Glenn
are his
Yarborough.
antennas.
Wow.
That's actually brilliant.
Wait, so he was like just mesmerized with the black butterflies that he like daydreamed himself into a slumber.
They just skipped over the whole. It was a whole nice little thing where it was like a biblical "don't leave the path" thing, and then the dwarves leave the path because they're starving, but they don't realize they're almost out of the wood. So whoops, gotta condense it.
Yeah, there's like three big things that they do cut out for the adaptation. They cut out Beorn, which we missed the part where Beorn would have been before they go into Mirkwood. They skip the part where they see the wood elves, which doesn't make any sense coming up because after he frees them from the spiders, he says, "Go to the wood elves clearing," even though they skipped that part. And they don't use the Arkenstone once we get to the Battle of Five Armies. They don't have that at all. They cut that part out. But those are the three big things that they cut out. But it's pretty streamlined.
Oh, terrifying.
All right, everybody, let's go make a sandwich. It's commercial break time.
Spider's making a sandwich right now.
This is the creepiest part yet.
It's interesting that
It's nice that
by giving them faces, they humanize the spiders. They're retaining the creepiness of spiders while giving them like this really weird, goofy, bearded face that emotes. Oh yeah, and then like the kaleidoscope death sequence.
Right. Well, I mean, how did that kill the spider? Just a rock knocked him off a ledge? Did he break his neck?
Don't really know, but this was a TV movie, so that explains a lot of the censorship we're worrying about here.
Yeah, I mean, they're very creative on how they do it, too. And, I mean, we talk about censorship, but once we get to the end of the movie, after the Battle of Five Army, it's really grim and it's really bloody, so... I think they're kind of saving it for that part.
You kind of see
Well, that actually just makes
Strangely
the
enough,
ending more effective, wouldn't it?
I kind of find find the river elves the creepiest designs of all the characters in the
Yeah.
film.
They're special. Don't know what. They're really weird.
Like they're the same race as Elrond, or at least like a cousin race to the High Elves, right? And I guess they figured, oh well, they're kind of bad guys, so we need to make them creepy too. That's the only thing I didn't like as a kid.
Yeah, is that they look more like. I guess they look more like orcs than the orcs do.
I love that face the spider makes when it goes.
Yeah. And since they live in the dark of the wood, you could tell in the Final Fantasy games later on, whenever they draw dark elves, they kind of draw it with that kind of weird, angular, lanky body that these elves get.
I like the ring sound effect. Boo.
Look at the face in that tree. What the heck?
Oh yeah. Snow White stuff.
What are
there.
those? But what are those trees and like Ents? Maybe it's an Ent. I don't know.
Yeah, that was another that Tolkien completely made
What
up,
elves?
and yet somehow it feels very English, even though it's not. You know, the first person to think of Ents is Tolkien, but it feels like it has a history along with everything else. You know,
Mhm.
the peculiar talent he had.
Riddle in the chat says he wishes he could throw a rock so hard that enemy kaleidoscopes into death.
Yeah, right. That would be my mutant power.
His animation just freezes, and the whole
Someone
camera
needs
just
to make
spins.
a
Oh, man,
turn-based
that'll be
RPG where the enemies do that after you kill them.
That'll be my X-Men name. It'll be Kaleidoscope, like collide. Yeah.
You know? I mean, look how creepy these wood elf
What the
designs are.
heck? Yeah.
Super sideburns?
Getting more dark crystal
Actually,
vibes again.
I kind of dig it. They're very foresty.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're of
Ah,
the
well,
trees or
They
something.
got these leaf hats.
Look at the elves, the fairest of folk. Aren't they gorgeous?
That would be a lot less sexy than Orlando Bloom.
You know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Now, I guess for a transparency shot like that, would you have to paint it that way, or would there be maybe like a camera trick you could use to get a half ghost image?
Honestly, I don't know.
I hope it was a camera trick. I'd hate to have to paint it that way.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
don't
know
know
that
how
they
you
paint
would do it.
them. Yeah, it is a camera trick. They put them on separate layers of glass, which creates the transparency effect. It's an old analog one. I don't know. I'm not sure how they pull it off. I bet most animators now wouldn't know how to do it the old-fashioned way.
You know, we were talking about censorship earlier, and here's a funny thing: like they're showing these characters drinking, and
You're right.
you can't
They're
do that.
basically drunk at this point.
You can't.
They're not
do
telling
that.
you. They're not telling you what they're drinking.
Oh, they flat out said it was fine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then Peter Jackson turned this into an action sequence that lasted like 25 minutes.
I remember that. That was special.
I think that's how we can just describe Peter Jackson as special.
Yeah, they're the special editions. Yeah.
Choose a carrot.
I still like the Peter Jackson movies, though I do think they're a bit excessive sometimes.
I like the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah.
I really do. It's the Hobbit ones. I feel like if someone could edit those down to like just a 2-hour movie, it would probably be pretty good.
Somebody did that, I believe.
Oh wow.
I have
I gotta
beefs with
find that then.
the Lord of the Rings movies too.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
where am I?
No.
And where
Yeah,
the heck is Tom Bombadil?
oh, I hate Tom Bombadil. That's the hardest thing to get through when
I
you start Fellowship of the Ring is to
love
get through
Tom
Tom
Bombadil.
Bombadil.
I feel like Tom Bombadil is Tolkien saying this is a magical fantasy world, right? And it feels very different from the serious war aspect of the rest of Lord of the Rings. But I like the childlike fantasy aspect of Middle Earth, so I
mean,
defend
it
Tom
makes-
Bombadil.
I mean, thematically, it makes sense because it's about, Frodo and all them leaving the safety of the Shire to go out into a dangerous, bigger world, and so they're kind of like easing into it. And Tom Bombadil's kind of like that barrier, like they get out of the fairy tale world and into the sword and sorcery fantasy world. But God, I hate that chapter.
love the way he talks to, and he's just like, "Hi do, berry do, me hearties." And he just sings.
Oh my god. Tom Bombadil Bombadillo. God.
Building
His
a
boots are
universe
yellow.
of a long-standing history of war and death, and then making a children's story that takes place in that.
Great meme.
Now that's some big brain stuff.
Talk about like giving the ring to Tom Bombadil, but he's more powerful than it, so he would just lose it, which is exactly how he came across the ring in the first place, because he dropped it in the river.
Cool water.
Yeah, I don't care about this thing.
Yeah, the water effect
The
is really
oldest
cool
in
and
the
it's
fo-
so simple. It's just they took a painting, a static painting, and then they just kind of like slid it across the glass of the camera, and that creates
cool.
it makes it look like waves of water going downhill.
Okay, now how would they? Would there be like a cutaway in the waterfall so that they could slide the painting behind it, right? Because I don't understand the.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it would be a separate layer. So the background layer would be the top layer, and then the layer with the transparent painting of the water would be behind that. So it looks like it's fitting in that rectangular groove.
Like on a big drum or wheel or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, something.
It was really hard to make cartoons back then,
Yeah.
guys.
Something
Yeah.
relevant about that. Like we've talked a little bit about, do people want to invest the time and energy into making something like this anymore? Like to me, it's good that technology has made some of these things easier. But if you know how they did it back then, that at least means you could say, well, I could digitally make a waterfall move, right? And it'll be a lot easier for me, but at least I know that's a technique that's possible, right? Like you can learn so much about what these old techniques are that then you just like reinterpret it or reapply it in the modern context.
Well, Ralph actually talks about this whenever he does one of his modern lectures. Is he says that we couldn't make cartoons without a corporation or a studio back then because it was analog and you need millions of dollars for ink and paper and cells and cameras and all that stuff. But now all that stuff is basically just in a program that you can buy. Boom, and anybody can need to know how to draw, know how to use the program. They don't have that $1 million buy-in that you had to have back in the day. And he's kind of just wondering why there isn't a renaissance of independent animation, because literally anyone can just go buy Toon Boom and make their own cartoon and have the same resources they had back in the 70s.
Because the corporations are
Probably
controlling-
because he doesn't spend a lot of time on Newgrounds.
On Newgrounds, yeah. You would think he would like Newgrounds. The guy who did Fritz the Cat and Heavy Traffic and Coonskin, I think Newgrounds would be right up his alley.
Dude, I love Newgrounds.
No, it's genuinely because the corporations control the market and they got a stranglehold on these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Disney will send cease and desist to anybody who does, a cartoon. Even if it's a public domain character like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or Peter Pan, they'll still send you a cease and desist and say that your version looks too much like their version. And they discourage people from using even public domain characters that are part of our cultural history. Yeah, that's the kind of power they have, unfortunately.
That's why you got to put Peter Pan in space. That way they can't sue.
Yeah.
I think in a way it's like the new ground point is kind of, I think it's insightful in a way because maybe one of the reasons we don't have a renaissance now is because you kind of need the limitation to help people to realize like literally nothing this imaginative like what we're watching now could exist without everyone banding together and financing it in the 70s. But nowadays you just kind of feel like, oh, I'll just kind of hang out and watch YouTube.
Right, you do need a team and coordinators and compromises to create a unified and palatable vision. If it's just you making a cartoon by yourself and doing whatever the hell you want, it'll be really appealing to you, but not necessarily a lot of people.
Yeah, and you're always going to find ways to keep yourself entertained endlessly nowadays. But back then, you kind of had to be motivated to make this level. Because it just wouldn't exist at all.
The tools are more democratic, and there are independent artists who might have the vision or the drive to make it happen, but there's not necessarily the institutional support, the institutional support for it.
Well, if you get institutional support, you get, and you're good at animating, you get poached by a corporation like Nickelodeon or Disney or Cartoon Network, and then you go and you make their shows instead of your shows, and
Yeah,
that's kind of what's really been holding that back.
that's a good point.
I love the.
Well, one of the problems too is like with everything being easier, you think even the Nickelodeon shows would be jumping in quality, but if anything, it looks like they're getting worse because they're cutting even more corners just to get them out
Yeah.
faster.
Then some good head and eye movements right there.
Look at they even put shading on the it's like hatching on the teeth.
But again, I love the design of Smaug here, and this is something that I definitely do get in arguments with people about. I think the design in Peter Jackson's Hobbit film is too stereotypical. It's too
Yeah.
random dragon. This is a unique design. And fun fact, Snarf is basically just a super deformed version of Smaug with no wings.
And he feels ancient too.
Oh,
I mean, his
yeah,
voice
I
is
kinda see
great.
what you mean.
Wow.
And I love the cat aesthetic. It's like Lio says, he looks like Smaug. This is a unique dragon. The one that was in the movie, people are like, oh, he's not a dragon, he's a wyvern because his arms are on his wings. Like, whatever, I don't care. But he looked like he'd be on the cover of a generic sword and sorcery magazine. This looks like, when you see it, that's Smaug.
I
Yeah,
also
he's
love
like hairy and stuff.
I also love the fact that his eyes work as spotlights. It really adds character.
Yeah,
Like,
that's something that I've only ever seen from Smaug. Like, no one else has spotlight eyes. Except maybe Janosch from Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah.
And he has such a polite conversation.
I like how he basically tells Bilbo it's okay for him to steal from him at the start of the conversation. You can't really tell if maybe he's trying to lull Bilbo into getting attacked, or if he just really doesn't care. I mean, he's a dragon, so he would never part with even a coin of his treasure, but it is kind of, I don't know, it's disarming. It's very unusual.
It's a buildup of everything Bilbo has been fighting to this point. It's a little polite society conversation like he had with Gollum and the dwarves. It's a physical danger that's more physically dangerous than even the spiders or the trolls. So he's testing him as a physical danger and as an intellectual danger.
Well, it's extremely English is what it is,
Yeah.
where they're having these like really nice and polite conversations when they know they're going to kill each other, but they're still being polite about it.
I think that Tolkien wrote a more obscure book called Farmer Giles of Ham, which was kind of like his take on the classic, English man goes out to save his town. And I think there's also some elements of that where there's that exact kind of thing, where there's like this polite conversation between the little farmer who has to save his town and the dragon that he's got to slay. But there's this tense little back and forth between them where they're measuring each other up.
It's a very direct
That explains the
contrast
influence
to,
on my
the way
writing,
Americans
because I have
fight
those.
enemies and rivals.
Well, I was even just saying that shows the influence on my writing, because I always have people, whether it's on the team or they're fighting against each other, having polite conversations in the middle of combat, and it probably comes from the fact that I read Tolkien really, really young.
It's also good for the Hobbit in particular because, the Hobbits as a race are very British, and the ultimate antagonist for them as a dragon needs to be kind of like the doppelganger version of how they reason and converse, I guess.
Maybe even kind of like an evil counterpoint to the hobbits, because one of the hobbits' flaws is that they're very isolationist. They just enjoy their comfort and they try to stay out of the normal world and ignore the problems in the outside world. And Smaug is literally hoarding himself up in a cave with all his treasure, just as lord of his own little pile of cash.
Yeah, if they just left Smaug alone, then he never would have woken up. He never would have destroyed Dale. But they didn't. They had to go and they had to bug him, and so.
Well, but Sauron might have recruited him for his army.
Yeah.
Maybe. That would have been an awesome fan fiction, like Smaug involved in one of the big Lord of the Rings battles. He just ate Bilbo.
Don't we get him in Silmarillion? Doesn't he? Or is that a different dragon?
The father of all dragons is mentioned. He was like gold and had no wings, so he's kind of like a prototype or pre-evolutionary version of the dragons.
But then you have Morgoth's son, who is a dragon big enough to mount himself on mountains.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Is that the black dragon?
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
like literally is perched up between two mountains,
Okay.
and his wingspan blots out the sun.
That's the guy Gandalf said not even that great dragon could have melted the ring, right? Because he was the biggest of all.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the dragons that ate the dwarves that had the 7 rings of power.
Yeah.
It's like because the rings of power made the dwarves like super greedy, and so that they dug down to where the dragons were, and they dug down and they amassed so much treasure it attracted dragons, and the dragons just went and ate them all, including the ones that had the rings.
You know, taunting him like that was not a very good idea.
Yeah.
That wasn't very English of you, Bilbo.
Ta-ta.
That was his mic drop moment.
Yeah.
That not only the conversation, the entire scene doesn't just get completely drawn out like it did in the third Hobbit film or second Hobbit film. It's too much of it. It was short and sweet.
Yeah. Everything's so much more concise in this, and I kind of prefer that over the excessive extrapolation that the other movie did. It's more compact and I don't know, focused.
And there's a point to Bilbo being the only one who's really involved. Like one of the commenters was kind of like making fun of the dwarves. The dwarves are useless. I mean, one of the points is like they are scared, and they've literally hired Bilbo specifically to steal something from the dragon. So they're technically right. It is that he signed the contract saying that's exactly what he was going to do. And Bilbo, when they meet the trolls, is a liability, and he gets them all captured. Bilbo, when they're with the goblins, is basically useless, and Bilbo becomes useful when they encounter the spiders. He saves the team from the wood elves, and this is kind of like now Bilbo is clearly like the leader of the group. He's clearly like the central when they need to get anywhere. So for Jackson to then have all the dwarves and Bilbo running around in the mountain undermines that whole point, because now it's not Bilbo taking leader. Like the closest thing the dwarves do to really helping him is, I think, Balin, who's kind of like the of all the dwarves, he's the one who likes Bilbo the most. He'll go with Bilbo as far as like the end of the cave, but he won't go inside with Bilbo. And I've noticed that theme a lot, where the hero will have someone who is brave enough to go with them all the way up to the dragon's cave, but they won't go inside the dragon's cave with them, which basically that serves the point of saying like the hero is the only one who will do it.
Hey, the real hero is that bird right there. He went in the cave.
Yeah.
Nah, dwarf useless, says Riddle of Lightning.
Go to Lake Town. What's up with the name Lake Town? Did
Strip.
Tolkien like fall asleep for a moment?
By a lake. They're
town
in a
on a
lake.
lake.
So it's Lake Town.
Well, it was originally Dale, and that got
If
burned
you
down.
pay attention, yeah. But if you pay attention to like all the towns of men, their names suck. All of them do.
Gondor. Give me a break.
Every frame of Smaug in this movie so far is a very tattoo-worthy image.
Right?
Yeah.
It should be on the side of a van, you know?
Definitely.
Dude, I love the heft that he has as he flies through the sky. This is an intimidating thing you would not want to see in real life.
Well, that's what I like about Rankin Bass's dragons, is that they're kind of fat. They're just really big. They're chonky, especially in Flight of Dragons. All the dragons of that one, they have a reason in the story, but they're all really like strong, fat looking. It's very unique.
It's creepy how he almost kind of
Give
floats in the
the
sky.
They look like reptilian bodies.
Yeah, he could probably just like rip through a castle wall, no problem.
I'm Bard, and I can speak to birds. What's that? Tweet tweet? Tweet tweet? Oh.
You don't say.
I guess they left out the whole little subplot of the town having like a jerk mayor who's a typical politician.
Yeah.
Man, he's got really good eyesight.
Oh, he has to be.
And this is the scene Jackson interpreted as like a giant, mechanical crossbow bolt shot.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even get that far in the series. That's sad.
Yeah, I like just an average archer's arrow. It's kind of nice.
Wow.
Well, it seemed at least a little bigger than an average archer's arrow, but not by much.
Now you just have to go down there into the water and retrieve that arrow because he's always retrieved it.
Yeah.
I mean, if he didn't retrieve
he
it,
seems
that would
very-
be a fitting end to the Black Arrow. I would feel good if that was my last shot with the Black Arrow.
I mean, he seems physically able enough to do that.
Yeah, that's right. The movie added this subplot where like Bard's father or grandfather had tried to kill Smaug and failed, and he was like the laughing stock of the town. Like, why did you add all that crap? The movie didn't need it. The
I feel
story
like
didn't need
I
it.
know that Jackson took some inspiration from the appendices, right? But I don't know how much of it is him pulling from the appendices and how much of it is him making stuff up. Like Thorin Oakenshield
Yeah.
really did get his name by fighting with that white orc and
Like
using a piece-
Azog or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and he did use a piece of oak as his shield, right? And then Jackson decided, well, we've got to add all of that appendix stuff to the movie and show all of it on screen, and then add Azog as a secondary villain.
Yeah, like all that stuff with the necromancer, like they only mentioned that for like a sentence in the Hobbit book. Gandalf's just like, yeah, I got to go deal with this asshole named the necromancer. You guys are on your own. And but then like in the movie, it's this big, long, drawn out sequence.
In a
Because I think
sense,
that's
quite a few of the scenes in the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies could be considered fan fiction.
yeah. He has that part
Yeah.
at the very
Yeah.
end where he's like, go and check out this ranger named Strider and go watch him, Legolas. Like he's like 4 years old.
Well, he was 80. He's 80 in the book, so he.
Oh, okay.
Well, you're right though. If Bilbo's 130, yet if he's 111 in Lord of the Rings and he's 50 in The Hobbit, that's like a 60-year gap. So he'd be 20. Yeah,
I
Aragorn
guess,
would be 20.
yeah. Now there is a plot hole here that's, I guess, in the book as well that I've never heard anybody, give me a good explanation for. Is if Bard and the King of the Wood Elves want money from the dwarves as restitution, why didn't Bilbo just offer them his 1/14 of total profits? Bam, no war. It solves everything.
That is a little odd because I know that Bilbo staked
'Cause they're
his
greedy.
Bilbo staked his 1/14 share with the Arkenstone. That is a little weird because Bilbo takes the Arkenstone to them so they have it as a bargaining chip, and then tells Thorin, "You may use my 1/14 share. As you can take that as because you said you could take what I want as my payment." Another neat parallelism is Smaug told him he could take what he wanted, and
he overcomplicated it when he could have just said like, well, 1/14 of that gold is mine and I'm going to give it to those guys.
Right.
And
Now,
bam,
maybe
but I guess there'd be no
the problem
conflict.
was Bilbo didn't think the 1/14 share would have satisfied the men and the elves, so he wanted to give them a strong bargaining position.
Yeah.
And Thorin got
Thanks.
pissed at him, but
And the
almost
elves are
killed him.
great. I want all of it, honestly.
Also, I want to point out that the Lake Man who became king, like a lot of his design aesthetics were then moved on to Jaga for Thundercats, like his
Oh.
razors.
Oh yeah, Bard, yeah.
I noticed that his
Design.
helmet's kind of similar.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, screw the Wood
Dwarven
Elves. But I
armor's
think
really good. This is awesome armor.
Yeah, put him in his place, Bilbo. He's a coward my ass.
You don't see us cringing now, do you?
Thorin, you just posted cringe, bro. You just posted cringe.
you are going to lose
Someone could
subscribers.
use that line.
I kind of miss the Arkenstone because it's a nice foreshadowing of the ring where you can become obsessed with something beautiful. You can become so fascinated by that object and its worth that you become blind to everything else.
Yeah, it is kind of a precursor to that.
All these helmets that just make them look like really tall gnomes.
I also think they had Bilbo cuck out in the cartoon a little bit. He does contribute a little bit in the fight before he gets knocked out, but in this they just have him like, nope, I'm out.
Yeah. I like how the Wood Elf's crown or helmet has just like cotton balls on it. I don't know what that stuff is. Marshmallow fluff.
It's his arts and crafts version of Elrond's crown.
Do.
They're just really big spores.
Can I just call attention to the fact that the Battle of Five Armies is the coolest title for the chapter to be the climax of a children's book ever?
Yeah.
Gandalf could probably take them all out by himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty subtle, complex take on war when you think about it. Where Thorin has a point. It's his damn money. It's his damn house. The humans have a point that they were promised riches and a flow of gold, and that they're the ones who killed the dragon. I don't sympathize with the elves that much, but they kind of have a point that they might have like a historical claim to some of it. Gandalf,
Well, they say that they've suffered because of. He says like we've suffered because of the worm over the years. So it's kind of this idea that the Smaug never would have come if the dwarves hadn't hoarded all that gold, and so all the chaos that Smaug wrought in Mirkwood or in Dale is all essentially the dwarves' fault because they attracted him, or at least they owe some sort of like civil restitution for it.
Like a reparations thing. It's like,
Yeah, right.
Something like Tolkien was saying, amassing a bunch of wealth just to amass wealth is a bad idea.
Yeah, we should just give all of our money to the government and just join a socialist. No.
And so
I'm
he-
more pointing to the fact that even biblically, like, greed is one of the dumbest sins.
And Tolkien's solution is literally to have like the classic, common enemy emerges, and they put aside their stupid grievance to deal with the more dangerous common enemy. So it's a simple solution, but he's basically getting kind of like almost every range and flavor of like foreign policy. Summed
Yeah.
up.
I mean, I know he didn't believe in allegory, but it is very World War I, World War II, with all these nations who were formerly, like, historically at each other's throats, allying themselves against, a common enemy, and then the other side, be it the Axis or whatever, doing the same thing, where they're all pooling their resources together for this massive all-out war, and that's kind of like what this is.
I think that's a good example of him merely taking his own life experiences and putting it into a book.
I just like how brutal these eagles are, just picking people up and dropping them for some reason in the air.
Well, that's because that's how golden
Dead.
eagles hunt. That's how golden eagles hunt. They grab animals and throw them up the mountains.
no, that's terrible.
Yeah, they basically just,
It's
they
effective.
eagle curb
I've
stomp
seen them do it
everybody.
to a goat.
Wow.
Look at all those corpses. Like, we talked about
Dragging the
censorship
goat off the
earlier,
mountain.
but man, look at that.
Love the tones on them too.
Couple of changes that happen. So Bombor does not die in the book, and he actually shows up at the Council of Elrond, bigger and fatter than ever. And Fili and Kili die in the book, which kind of is like the ultimate like end of Thorin's reign, because not only does he die, but any one of his family dies, and the line breaks. So there's kind of a parallel between Thorin's story and Aragorn's story, where Thorin kind of foreshadows the return of the king. He's the return. He's the king under the mountain who has returned, and he loses his line. Aragorn's line was lost until Aragorn comes and reclaims his rightful place as the throne. So it's sort of like there's a sad tragedy to Thorin's line that the opposite.
His parting speech here is really beautiful. It's really moving. Whereas, like, if we just, here it is. Oh. And there's no compromise. This is a kid's movie, essentially, but there's no compromise on the guy dying at the end. Just how sad and melancholy that scene is. They stick to it. They don't pull a Frankenweenie, which where the guy dies, and everybody's really sad, but then, oh, never mind, they're alive now. I hate that.
Yeah, and half of them are dead, right? Didn't?
Yeah,
Gandalf
5 of
said,
them
yeah.
die, according to Gandalf.
The rest of them died off screen, but still, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
The pony is scary, says Riddle of Lightning. Of all the things to scare you in this movie. Well, that's gotta be a donkey, right?
I just think the pony looks
Yeah.
kind of wrinkly.
Yeah.
But then again, everybody in this movie looks a bit wrinkly.
Well, even Gandalf had
It's probably
some
all the
battle
hatching
wounds.
that makes it look wrinkly.
Yeah.
Animated hatching.
As somebody who's
I
done
like
hatching,
that,
I
though.
cannot
It really
even
keeps
imagine
that
keeping it.
illustrative look to it.
What are you saying? You do hatching, Lyle, recently?
So as someone who's done hatching, I can't even imagine keeping it even in motion in individual frames.
Right? Like, the less lines, the better, for animation, because at least it's easier. But if you look at these character designs, they're so detailed, and there's so many lines to keep track of, frame by frame. It's,
Oh yeah, I
look at
hatch
that
all
book,
the time,
that-
but I kind of just improvise it. I could not repeat hatching.
I told Lio this, but I noticed there's a scene in Thundercats where they have cross-hatching right under Lionel's armpit as he's climbing up a mountain, and they animate the cross-hatching under his armpit. Like, that specific spot needs all that detail.
Yes, they know what's up.
Wow.
I
Amazing.
I really like how the studio was dedicated to getting every line on the character consistently.
Yeah, so we were talking about the studio. So it was Topcraft, and they actually still exist today. They just kept changing their names and getting bought out by different studios. So they started out as Topcraft, then they split, and some went to form Ghibli, and some went to form Pacific Animation. Then Pacific Animation got bought by Disney and became Walt Disney Animation Japan. And then Disney dissolved all of its overseas animation studios, and so the people who staffed Walt Disney Animation Japan, they formed the Answer Studio, and the Answer Studio animated Transformers, and that's where they are now. They're the Answer Studio, but they still exist in one form today from where they were here in the 1970s. They just a lot of animation studios actually kind of have that story where they last for like 5 or 6 years, and then they go bust or something, and then the talent forms another studio that's made up of all the same people. It's just technically a different studio, and then rinse and repeat for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
So that was majority. It seemed like that was majority Japanese. I mean, not just the director, the people at the top, but the animators even. Which I guess, as you said, this spawned out of Disney Japan.
Well, yeah, it's a co-production. So Rankin Bass was actually the very first American studio to outsource its animation from Japan. They did the King Kong show with Toei, and then after that, so all those stop motion Rankin Bass movies like Rudolph and stuff like that, even the stop motion was done in Japan. Frosty the Snowman, the animation for that one was done in Japan. Like all of Rankin Bass, it was all U.S. Japanese co-productions. They were the first ones to do that, which led into the 1980s where everybody co-produced with Japan. All Transformers, G.I. Joe, like every animation was outsourced to Japan throughout the 80s. But Rankin Bass was the first ones to do that.
Interesting.
Wow. It kind of goes with the theme that Japan knows how to do like classic European fantasy folklore imagination better than Europe does.
Maybe because they see it from an outside perspective. To them, to us, samurai are cool because they're sort of different from us, right? And to a Japanese person, it's a part of your own cultural legacy. So I don't know. Maybe if you look at another culture's cultural legacy, maybe you can see things about it that even the people who that's their part of their heritage, they might not notice about it.
Well, they're not critical of it the same way, the the domestic culture would be. Like, we're critical of cowboys and Indians because, like the Indians were just trying to get their land back and the cowboys were all marauders, whatever. And so we have this, we don't do cowboys and Indians much anymore because we have this sort of this cultural guilt about it. Whereas an outsider, a Japanese person, like, oh, cowboys and Indians, so gay. Oh, we do cowboys and Indians, and they think it's awesome. Oh, 6-gun cowboy shooting Indian. Oh, circle the wagon, so cool. Like, they don't care. They don't see it from the same perspective that we would. And I guess it's the same thing. Like, we think samurais and ninjas are cool when the Japanese know they might have a very different attitude and perspective because it's their culture.
I never really thought about it like that. I just figured that the East and West were kind of immensely fascinated with each other.
We are. We like to watch each other from a distance. We're very voyeuristic towards each other.
I mean, the initial explosion of it was called like the Japanese in France, where impressionists would just go nuts buying up Japanese prints because they realized it was a completely different approach to art than had ever existed in the West. And so you can find Van Gogh paintings where he's literally just like buying some cheap, ukiyo-e print, and then he's painting it in his, thick Van Gogh style, but copying the shapes directly from the printmaking tradition. It was completely isolated culture. Yeah.
It's the 19th century version of the kid trying to draw Sailor Moon in their marble notebook during like 7th grade math class.
I mean, that's not incorrect.
Van Gogh was a weeaboo.
Yeah.
In a sense, yes.
I'm just really taken back by the quality of this movie. I thought it's a bit of a love to hate it, hate to love it kind of thing, I guess, within the fandom. But I don't know. I think this was really good.
I've never hated it.
Always genuinely loved it.
There was like a weird little nostalgia critic era of the internet where it became cool to hate on this stuff.
Yeah.
But I have never hated The Hobbit. Even when I got old enough to like say, okay, yeah, I wish they hadn't cut this stuff out of the book, right? Like think about it critically. It continues to be a really impressive piece of animation in my estimation.
I agree.
Yeah, me too. I mean, obviously, maybe I'm biased because I saw it as a kid and I've always loved it. But I mean, I've read the book 3 or 4 times. I compare the book with the movie. I know what they cut, but I'm also impressed by the precision of their cuts. I mean, the things that they remove, if you hadn't read the book, you wouldn't miss them. So, like, you wouldn't miss Beorn if you hadn't read the book. You wouldn't miss necessarily the Arkenstone if you hadn't read the book. The only thing is that the only plot hole is because they cut out the scene where they first meet the Wood Elves in the clearing. And that's the only thing that doesn't quite add up in their adaptation. But everything else is just, it's very streamlined, it's very well paced. When you were on Twitter today, Marm, you pointed out this one guy's review from the 70s, where he called the adaptation execrable.
Yeah.
Like, geez,
wow.
like that's really harsh to call it that.
Well, what the other thing I've noticed is a lot of old timey, greatest generation Scrooge McDuck fans hated the 90s TV series because they thought that they thought it missed the whole point of the character. The whole point of the old Scrooge McDuck character is that he's a crusty, salty old skinflint, and 90s DuckTales made him kind of a nicer grandfather figure who will still go on cool adventures, but he's a lot more pleasant in 90s DuckTales. And my attitude has been, yeah, they are kind of missing the point a little bit, or they're reinterpreting the character a lot, but I think there's value in a thing if it can be the introduction to a generation of something good. So like the Hobbit cartoon was my introduction to the work of Tolkien. DuckTales, the 90s show, was my introduction to the world of Scrooge McDuck. And it's actually kind of more interesting if you go back and say, oh wow, there are differences. I like when there are differences from media to media, because that forces you to think about, why are there differences? Are these differences good or bad? That kind of thing.
Exactly. And I mean, just going back to DuckTales and the Carl Barks Duck comics and everything, even Carl Barks's versions of the Duck family, like Donald, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, were very different from how the characters were portrayed in the shorts where they first appeared.
Yeah.
But no one's going to say that Carl Barks's versions of those characters are illegitimate because they're different from the original versions from the shorts. So there's no reason to say that the DuckTales version of those characters are illegitimate just because they're not like the Carl Barks version. It's like a telephone game. Each version is legitimate in its own canon, and I think there's room in this world for different interpretations of the same media. Not all of them are going to be good. You know, sometimes you're going to get like a Quack Pack, which is just terrible. But
it had things you could value. It had decent animation and had stupid episodes.
It did. Quack Pack had its moments, but it was no Goof Troop. But like but the things like, look at Batman. 89 Batman. I like Batman the animated series. I like Batman Brave and the Bold. I even liked the Batman cartoon from the 2000s. I mean, there's all these million, and each one is legitimate. And there's room in our hearts for all these different versions of Batman, no matter how wildly different they are from each other. And I feel the same thing about like these Lord of the Rings movies, like Jackson movie. They're cool in a lot of ways. They're different from but there's room.
You're cutting out a little.
About the Peter Jackson Hobbit movie. I'm cutting out a bit. No.
You're cutting out a bit, yeah.
No. I was
He's
just
good
because
on
I was
mine.
talking too much.
Now,
Me out when I talk, which is probably a good thing.
Now, where would the line be, though, between reinterpreting a beloved franchise and bastardizing a beloved franchise? Where?
I mean, that's a good question. It all comes down to execution. I mean, you can do like a remake that's in concept only, and it can still be legitimate. David Cronenberg's version of The Fly, or the Thing remake by John Carpenter, they're very different from the originals, but they're also very good. It really just comes down to, is version good or not? It's like those Planet of the Apes movies, the trilogy that came out over the past 10 years, versus the Matt Damon Planet of the Apes movie that was awful. Like, that one tried to be too much like the Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes movie, but the trilogy, the Rise and Dawn and whatever, were very, very different, and they were better because they were different.
Yeah.
Where's the rhyme or reason? I'm not sure, but
reinterpret. I don't know. So I feel like reinterpretation means you start with the general idea, and you try to dumb down that idea to its real core appeal. And can you keep that core appeal, even if you do something wildly different than it? And I don't know, for things I can think of that I feel like they're bastardizations of the original, they tend to feel there needs to be a new edition of Powerpuff Girls, and we're afraid of violence, so we're going to have an emphasis on cutesy bootsy Powerpuff Girls twerking or something, right? And there's no connection between what you're trying to do now and what they were trying to do then. I don't know if you could do.
Because they're not being genuine. That's the problem. There's too much ironic humor, and you're not actually just sticking with the idea or why people like the show. You're not having a genuine experience. And I think that's where the bastardization comes into it.
There was irony within Powerpuff Girls, for example, but it would also be very genuine, really good action adventure stuff. A kid could see interpret Powerpuff Girls as really kick-ass superhero fighting, and have all of the superhero, in jokes fly over their head. You have to capture something good within it, apart from I love goofy humor, but there has to be some core appeal to it beyond just the goofy humor. Whether that's adventure, whether that's a coming of age story, or beautiful artistic visuals, there's got to be some kind of oomph to it.
Yeah, I think audiences can tell when a reboot or a remake was done as a corporate mandate, or when it was done out of a creator's passion. And there's something, just an aesthetic or a quality or a vibe that it gives off, where the Powerpuff Girls reboots, that was something that was ordered by corporate, and it came down, and the people at Cartoon Network Studios were oh well, I guess we're doing a Powerpuff Girls reboot. All right, well, let's get started on it. There's no passion, there's no energy, there's no love for what they're doing. They're just doing it because someone in the corporate office told them to do it. Whereas you see something like the 2003 Ninja Turtles cartoon, that was Peter Laird wanting to do his own animated version of Ninja Turtles that hewed closer to his original vision from the Mirage comics. There was a creator involved who said, now's the time to make this version of Ninja Turtles that fits my vision, and it's really good. Because there was someone who made it because they wanted to make it, they had a reason to make it, and it fit, and they got to make it the way they wanted to make it. Whereas something like, Powerpuff Girls reboot is just trash.
Notice how I artfully avoided mentioning the one thing that would have triggered Lyle Convoy.
Yes. I didn't go there either. I thought about it, but
We're all avoiding it.
the elephant in the room, yes.
I will break you all like Kit Kat.
Yeah, I guess it is like there has to be an earnestness that you tap into that fits within like a I guess the universe, like the Tolkien verse here, is shown to be kind of a meta verse, I guess, where you can come at it from different creative angles, but you can still tap into it authentically, so long as it feels like an earnest portrayal and exploration, I suppose. It doesn't have to look a particular way. It just has to have the same kind of oxygen in the air, the same feel.
That's what made the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy feel so soulless and empty, is because he didn't want to make them. Guillermo del Toro was supposed to make them, but then he backed out, and New Line Cinema or Warner Brothers, whoever, said, Peter, you have to make these movies. And he was like, fuck. And so he went and he made the movies that he didn't want to make. And you can feel that apathy and lethargy when you watch those movies, where he's just going through the motions. We're like, all right, so they're in the barrels, let's have a fight scene. Okay, there's the dragon, let's have a fight scene. Okay, they're at the war, and it's going to look like the Battle of Pelennor Field or the Battle of Helm's Deep. It's going to look like a generic Lord of the Rings war, blah, blah, blah. And it's so, I don't know, paint by numbers, and there's no real love in that movie. I know there's no heart. I know that sounds like something so... You can't quantify that, but you can feel it when you watch the movie. Whereas, like The Hobbit, this animated movie we just watched, Rankin Bass made it because they saw the thematic through line of the story. Like, this is Bilbo's story. This is Bilbo's journey, his development. This is a little man in a big world, learning just how big that world is, but that he's still, and what his place in that world is. And it's like how Marmaduke pointed out, that scene where they have all the dwarves fighting Smaug, instead of Bilbo going and being the only one brave enough to confront it, because they lost the point of the story, where it's not Bilbo's story anymore. It's just, another Lord of the Rings movie by Peter Jackson. And I think that's the difference, whereas, they lost the focus of what mattered.
Yeah,
I was talking too much.
I guess, like, one of the nice aspects, because I'm realizing after watching this that I suppose, like, inventing the hobbits was a way for Tolkien to he came up with a new race of creatures within the English mythology, but he made one that actually could be an access point for children to be able to relate to the world, like, instead of just making a human being the narrator for this, or the protagonist that you followed, so that you could relate to this weird fantastical world. He came up with a race that was kind of more childlike than humans typically are, adult humans. So
children literally have to navigate a world that's too big for them.
Yeah,
exactly.
So he came up with like a dwarf, like a race that's like the size of dwarfs, and yet have the young, lighthearted spirit kind of feel of let's just hang around and play that kids have. And I guess this animated version gives you that impression, and maybe the Hobbit animated, or the Hobbit, the movie series from a few years ago, just kind of has like an adult, I don't know, like the Hobbits don't feel like they give you that childlike wonder, I guess.
The only part I like, the only part I like of the Peter Jackson Hobbit films is kind of like the opening scenes of An Unexpected Journey, where he's kind of, because he needed to he decided he needed to literally include basically every line from the book and all his fan fiction. That part's actually really good because it captures kind of all of Bilbo's fastidiousness and his hesitancy to go on the adventure. In the cartoon, it's a little blunt. Gandalf shows up. Hi, I'm Gandalf. Enough. Gandalf means me. Right? we get right into it. But I think that it got off the rails once Jackson took it out of Hobbiton and into the adventurous world. Then he wanted to add all of his crazy adventure ideas, but fun little story. When I was like 12, I wanted to write a screenplay for my version of the Hobbit movie, and that I included all of those bits from the book that were left out of the cartoon because I felt like those were really important to establishing Bilbo as like a kind of fussy, English gentleman who just does not want to go on an adventure, and an adventure finds him. So that's I want to see that fan edit now, actually, because I almost feel like there could be salvageable aspects of the Jackson movie if you had a better editor.
Like, where can I find that? I kind of want to watch it too, because I mean, if all the elements from the book are there in the movie, you just cut out all that fluff and you whittle it down to 2 or 2.5 hours, you might actually have a pretty decent version of the Hobbit. But
to Frodo.
Like the unreliable narrator version and then the real version. So it's like the endings to Clue, where it's like, this is what could have happened, and this is what really happened.
Real ending, yeah.
But the problem with that is I think Bilbo's version would end up being cooler than the real version, because Bilbo's version was like, yeah, there were 3 dragons and they had machine guns, and I got one in a full Nelson and I broke his neck with my bare hands.
You mean
God? Yeah, so I got him in the barrels,
cool
but then
chase in the barrels.
Yeah, all the elves showed up and they started shooting at me, but I was too badass for them. That like the arrows were hitting the barrels, but I was dodging the arrows as going down like the White River Rapids. Oh man, it was badass.
The barrel
from one barrel
to
to the
river
next
and rolled down back into the river, man.
All right, well, I think I'm gonna have to call it quits for tonight, guys. That was a lot of fun. It was very.
And
See ya.